Most chefs think impact happens on the plate. But what if the real impact happens before the plate even exists? You're listening to Fugitive Chefs, a podcast about what happens when chefs step outside the traditional kitchen path. I'm Furkan. I've worked in kitchens like Noma and Mugaritz, and today I work outside restaurants as a senior innovation chef, currently at Kraft Heinz. Today's guest is someone who didn't really leave food. She just moved upstream. Andrea Zick started her journey as a chef apprentice in Germany, working in high-end hospitality across Berlin and London, including places like the Oxford Tower restaurant. But instead of continuing down the traditional kitchen path, she shifted her focus towards something much bigger. Today, she works at the intersection of sustainability, education, and food systems, coaching apprentices, leading research, and exploring how chefs can actually drive climate impact through what they cook. And this episode is about something we don't talk about enough. What happens when you stop thinking only about the plate and start thinking about the system behind it? Hello, Andrea. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Furkan. Such a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, so nice to be here, right? I mean, yours is a little special, I would say, because you have been following the podcast, then a part of the community, and actually contributing a lot to it. A lot of time I see you sharing the articles you're writing or the resources that you see around or workshops you see around. So I think this is going to be interesting for me because I would love to know more of like how you got where you got today. So I know where you are today, but yeah, for the listeners, before we start into this, Andrea, tell us what do you do today?
Recently, I've started working as a professional sustainability skills coach that has nothing, obviously, to do with cooking and working in kitchens, which is just a nice segue that starting your life as a chef doesn't mean that you will forever be in the kitchen, and there's many, many avenues you might take. So yeah, when I work, I basically coach people on an apprenticeship, which is linked to corporate responsibility and sustainability. And I basically help people to make businesses, I would say, better, although some people might argue it makes businesses more complicated because people in sustainability and corporate responsibility often challenge business assumptions and interrogate what the purpose of a business is and how business should be done.
Yeah, that's a quite a complicated process, right? Especially you being an outsider to that company, coaching them on what you would say in their scenario works well. But I guess there's no one solution to thing, and of course these things which are difficult and yet to be done in the long run do cause friction. So that's super interesting what you do, Andrea. And yeah, that's the whole premise of the podcast. What you just said that even though you start as a chef, you shouldn't like. There's no reason you have to end up being in that career and contribute towards food. So, like now, to take completely back the listener who has now an idea of what Andrea's day to day more or less looks like. But you started off in Germany as a chef apprentice and then worked in hotels in Berlin and London. Tell us about that beginning of the career. Why getting into food as a career? Why choosing to be a chef as a career?
A very pragmatic choice. My life path, I think, has a lot of pragmatic choices. I was given the opportunity very early on when I was 16 to move in a flat next to my parents. And my parents said, "We are happy to pay the rent, but you have to pay anything you want in that flat, right?" And as a student with 16 years old, you can imagine there wasn't much pocket money to do so. So I started working part-time very early on, and I've always enjoyed making food, cooking food. We had a family context where I would cook with my grandparents, with my father, unusually maybe, but that was the person who was the food preparer in our household. And I was like, well, what could I possibly do to get some money coming in? And
Yeah.
working in kitchens was the obvious choice. So I started working in a pizza service of all places. But it was a pizza service where there was actually the pizza dough being made from scratch.
Oh
Um,
wow.
pretty much most ingredients were fresh ingredients. Yes, we still made a pizza, right? Which you could argue is a fast food, maybe processed food, but yeah, it was made from scratch. And I've done that for about 3 years until I finished my A levels. And I had then to make a pragmatic decision. What do I want to do next? Wanted to study history, and art was also on the cards, but none of them gave me a real income pathway. So I was like, well, how about if I do an apprenticeship while I'm young? I've got the capabilities, and cooking and being in the kitchen requires physical capabilities as much as mental capabilities. So I was like, yeah, let me try that. Got an opportunity to work in a 5-star hotel in Berlin and did the apprenticeship and did it pretty quickly. So when you have A levels in Germany, you can shorten your apprenticeship a little bit. You can do this right at the beginning, which is not what I've done, or further down the line where you can say, well, actually, I've achieved all the qualifications I need, or kind of I've
Okay.
presented all the knowledge, skills, and behaviors I need to present, and then you can go a little bit earlier into the examination. I've done
Yeah, that's
that.
super interesting.
Yeah, after 2.5 years, finished the apprenticeship and then stuck around in kitchens for a while, ended up working for Four Seasons Berlin, which was taken over by a different hotel company. And at that point, I was on a crossroad in my life. I was like, I'd like to go studying, but I'm not feeling ready. So this opportunity presented itself, and I said, very cocky in the kitchen, oh yeah, I wouldn't have a problem going abroad. And my sous chef overheard that. Within half an hour, I had a call with the executive chef in Four Seasons Park Lane, London. I think about a day or 2 days later, I knew that I would be having a commis chef position in London Park Lane. It took about 3 weeks to pack up, heading to London, starting from scratch, with the ambition really to practice English, be able to be fluent in English. And at that point, I was convinced I'd stay a year in London and go back to Germany to study nutrition and health. That was already on the cards. Year into London, I did a little bit of math on and logistics on where I would be better off studying, and it turned out unexpectedly that London was the better option, because
Okay.
I had a
Wow.
job. I had a flat there. I had started building a network, and the study fees I would have had to pay were covered by what was called a maintenance grant. So basically, I
Hmm.
didn't really pay a fee because I had that money coming in as I was a mature student. So in essence, the costs I was looking at were my living costs for the flat, right? And because I had
Yeah.
this part-time job, and I was able to, well, it was a full-time job, and I was able to convince Four Seasons to go part-time. I had a part-time job. If I would have gone back to Germany, I would have needed to find a job, a place to
Yeah.
live, all those logistical challenges. So I was like, well, actually, I think pragmatically staying in London feels like a much better choice. Top of it, I'm gonna get a degree in English, or with English speaking, and that keeps the door open to move into other places in the world if I ever want to.
Yeah. And you when you got into the kitchens, Andrea, for you, like of course you had this back of the mind, you want to do this studies and nutrition, but did it come after working in the kitchen? It was already there, and or like how did you see yourself if you would have not done that, say not done that pivot into education? Would you still see yourself working in those kitchens and growing the ranks, I guess?
Good question, and kind of fills a gap of what I probably should have said. So,
Mm.
when I before I went to London, I was really contemplating already how can I move into a space where I would, let's put it bluntly, where the working conditions are a little bit more balanced. So, most people who have spoken on your podcast will have said there are times in kitchens where you work really long hours. It can be really physical. It's the greatest fun on the planet when it works, and you pull together and you see really amazing things. But you do have weeks and months where you basically go home to sleep. You have sometimes very short night turnarounds. Sometimes you work late and you start working early, and it just physically is very demanding. And I was telling myself at that point, I won't be able to do this when I'm in my 40s or 50s. So I was kind of plotting a way to find a way where I can protect my health and well-being, right?
Right.
Moving into a space where I can still enjoy the passion for food I had, and nutrition and health felt like a sensible thing. So in
Mm.
Germany, the degree is called Ökotrophologie, which is a mouthful,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And is I think a lot more focused on the kind of food science bit.
Okay.
Um, And I wasn't initially so interested in the kind of what food does to the body, how important
Mm-hmm.
food is for health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I kind of went down the path of um, thinking about what food means in my life and in other people's life, the more I got convinced that actually that's a really interesting aspect of food, which as a chef back in the days when I was in the kitchen wasn't an obvious pathway. There was one training pathway in Germany at that point, which was a dietetics chef, and you would
Okay.
have worked in a hospital. Now,
Hospital, yeah.
no offense, I'm a great believer in incredible culinary people working in care settings and not hotels, hospitals and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of institutions. But that's not a place where I've ever seen myself. So that pathway felt not like a place I wanted to be. I didn't want to cook for people who are unwell. I wanted to cook for people to stay well.
Yeah.
Two very different things. And for me, food is a very holistic thing. Um, you work in a kind of food development context where food is holistic from the context of sensory, taste,
Mm-hmm.
sound, right? For me, food is also nourishing the kind of bringing people together and what it means having people eating together from a well-being aspect, the conversations you are having over food, um, the experience you're creating when you're cooking food, the caregiving which comes from making food for someone. All these aspects I find super, super relevant. And nutrition and health, I think, combine some of that, not all of it, but some of it. And the degree I ended up doing, I think, was a pretty interesting balance where there was a sciencey aspect. So I needed to do food chemistry and food safety and biochemistry and that sort of thing. But I also had a side which was more your social science side. So in academic terms, we call that it was a interdisciplinary disciplinary
Okay.
degrees. It wasn't only science, it wasn't so hard science as in natural sciences, or it wasn't only social science. And that combination kind of felt to me in hindsight as if this makes the most sense because food isn't one or the other. It isn't chemistry,
Mm.
purely chemistry. It isn't purely a social experience, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting what you say, and all through your conversation of like how you had this personal struggle, of course, between the countries. Academics works different in every country, how they structure it, also the options available. But for me, what the surprise is after talking from the rest of the community and people around and me, like the interns we receive at Kraft Heinz, the students I had before in Basque Culinary Center, all of them a lot of them so moved to education. So the pivot that you have done of like seeing this kitchen doesn't fit my lifestyle, or it does now and it will not at some point, they say okay, academic is an answer to it. That But then for you it was about choosing to go in a different discipline of sorts, I would say, rather than really going into, like, for example, a lot of people go into some sort of a skill based course than a knowledge based course. So you just upskill yourself within the kitchen, and you somehow hope that, okay, doing this, for example, if I do I don't know, masters in restaurant business or management in innovation management in kitchens and things like that, at the end you'll be somehow in the same environment, or facing the same conditions, because your business is still like centered towards guests and their availabilities and how they want to dine on the weekends and stuff like that. So for me, that is interesting, and I feel that also comes, of course, because you had done A levels in Germany, and you were somebody who would naturally could have that leap into academics. Maybe if somebody has started, done high school and then gone into kitchens, I think that becomes a little more tricky part, but there's still way around. So for me, I love that you're highlighting this other side of how you can be connected to food when it's not very obvious, and it's not very obvious that you'll work at this, I don't know, in fine dining as somebody who's getting more into nutritious side of things. But you also said something in your form, Andrea, that you said that you did not really leave the kitchen, you just moved upstream. Now expand on that. What do you mean upstream? Because for many people, upstream in the kitchen would be something what I said earlier, like I'll study the science of food and apply that in an R&D as a head chef in a restaurant. What was upstream for you?
Well, a couple of things. I think my my heart and physical body always returned to the kitchen. So
Mm-hmm.
um, once I finished my nutrition degree, I worked for quite a while in health and well-being. So I managed a spa, and um, food has always played a role in that. I always connected back to food, and I couldn't see myself not ever connecting back to food. And then eventually I became the PA to the general manager at a really large London restaurant. And I enjoyed the moments going back to the kitchen, speaking with the chefs, understanding what their day-to-day work is like, probably the most. And yes, that's a bias, but I have no problem saying that. I appreciate what the front of house needs to do for running a restaurant as much, and all the other people who are contributing to this big ecosystem of making a restaurant successful. But I always miss the camaraderie, the ways of working with the kitchen. And I then started thinking about food waste reduction, and food waste reduction was really kind of where I had enough practical skills to tell
Mm-hmm.
people how to do that in real life. First with kind of civil servants or public people. So I ended
Mm-hmm.
up delivering 2 workshops with a friend of mine for people of the public. And that kind of started growing legs and arms. I got a lot more interested in how can I actually then influence the chefs in the kitchen
Uh-huh.
to reduce food waste. And I was always very early on. So we are now, I would say, at food waste reduction 3.0, right? In hospitality and kitchens. This is pre-COVID, where chefs were still walking around saying, "Oh, we don't produce any food waste." And if
Yeah.
anyone has ever spoken to Wojciech, and I know you've interviewed and
Yeah. Yeah.
spoken to there is so much waste still in kitchens, and it's just not being seen as waste, right? And Wojciech does a great job in highlighting that the end of a carrot has a value, etc., right? So that was kind of the mindset. And then I had that pushback from the kitchen I
Yeah.
kind of worked with, so to say. And I was like, well, this is an interesting tension. They basically think I'm an outsider now, which
Yeah.
effectively I am because I'm not in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And they've got a valid point. I'm not having to do the shift every day. So who am I to say you need to change the carrot tops and include them, right? So there were these conversations, regular conversations. And that's what I mean by upstream. So I was kind of a sidestep, but I would be so adjacent and so going back and forth between kitchens, trying to understand to an extent why the things I wanted, trying to drive corporate responsibility, sustainability forward, were so very difficult. Um,
Mm.
and I had that sweet spot that I at least could understand what it means to be in the kitchen. So that was pre-COVID. COVID hit, and I had built this understanding of working with food surplus, etc. So a unique opportunity arose first few weeks of COVID, where there's a community kitchen near where I live. They needed someone to step in because the safety requirements of someone being in the kitchen were so much higher, that they wanted someone who's got the professional background. And basically they asked me, I said, okay, here we go, let's try this. I've got nothing better to do. I'm furloughed. I want to have a purpose while the whole world stops. So I started, I think about a month after the COVID lockdowns in London, I started cooking by myself in a kitchen for about 25 people, where the food was then delivered to the community. Um, and that really was a full circle moment. It brought me right back to being in the kitchen and the pressures of the being in the kitchen. But it was also a full circle moment during COVID, where I reconnected to the nutrition and health degree, because this whole vulnerability of people accessing food has a nutrition and health aspect as well, right? As a
Yeah.
food security context. And certainly in London, and I've seen some stuff in America as well, where there was a whole activation of gastronomy and businesses, catering businesses, trying to help people in need
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, right? And
Yeah.
it started with this small project, and I then buggered the GM of the restaurant I was working. I was like, our kitchen is empty. Can you
Yeah.
convince the board of directors for us to use surplus food and produce food for the community? Obviously, this is a really big business, so this wasn't a one conversation thing. We kind of
Mm-hmm.
buggered everyone we can possibly bugger. We reached out to organizations we had worked with before to kind of assure that we had the supply chain of the surplus. We reached out to organizations who would then take the meals, etc. And when we had the buy-in from the board, when everyone was on board, so to say, we ran a little pilot and cooked for the very same community I was cooking here where I
Mm-hmm.
live, a delivery meal in that kitchen. It was only 35 meals, which
Okay.
for a restaurant which normally churns out up to 1,000 meals a week is
Yeah.
nothing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Tested it, and that then grew into eventually cooking 10,000 meals a month during the height of COVID, with a lot of the people who worked in the kitchen. And I then had, for the very first time, the pleasure and joy working with the chefs I kept buggering, right? I
Mm-hmm.
basically stood side by side in the kitchen with them. And in that kitchen, which I saw day to day, asking them to make all these changes. And I think that flipped a dial in me, which really made me aware how much is being asked from the chefs and how much I've been asking from the chefs, right? Without ever really asking what that means for them when they're running a business, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's what I mean by adjacent, and that then led to my PhD, because again, COVID lockdowns, that PhD funding came about. I've asked my supervisor in my for my undergrad and said, look, there's this really amazing PhD opportunity. Can you think of someone who should apply for it? And I was actually not considering myself, genuinely
Oh
not
wow.
considering
Yeah.
because I didn't have a master's. It wasn't a main criteria, but it wasn't an obvious pathway.
Uh-huh.
And she basically bounced back and said, look, you should apply, and I'm happy to help you write the application. And the rest is history. So we wrote the application together. I did the interview and got the offer. And then, almost in honoring the pathway I had taken,
Mm-hmm.
it made so much sense to focus a food systems PhD and a research project around hospitality and catering. And I entered it thinking of food waste predominantly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Within the first 6 months or so, I realized, well, net zero was the big topic then, and carbon reduction of menus started kind of bubbling up. So I was like, well, let's do food waste and carbon reduction, but
Mm-hmm.
work with chefs. Let them tell us what it means to them. If someone like me, who was working in an ESG role, comes and says, well, we need you to reduce these, we need you to change these menus to reduce carbon and food waste, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unpack what that actually means for the chefs.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I feel all this that you mentioned about this initiative that you took in COVID, and yeah, I feel it's very unique. I feel it's your role where you can do that from, and also the benefits of you having a past in chef, how you highlighted on how you could have these conversations and be this bridge. And I feel that's what the limitations is when you think about sustainability or think about health. It seems like terms that are easy to comprehend if you just literally take the word, but then the systems or the steps it takes is not very obvious somehow for chefs. And then there's people like you who have, or there's, I mean, not just like you, the people who have studied sustainability as a concept but have no connection with kitchens. Yes, they are studying data and they are studying how much of food waste is going from restaurants, what part of it is plastic, what a part of it is plate waste. There are people studying that, but they have never been inside a professional kitchen or had this contact, So like I feel that's the benefit. I mean, from my eyes, what I can see is you have this benefit of being able to speak this common language. Apart from that, what else would you say is your benefits of having had a past in the kitchen? Because I guess a lot of peers with you in their undergrad or PhD like these come out of these academic institutes, but don't really have that much of an impact. So what do you think sets you apart from the rest who have not been in the kitchen?
Now, this is almost flipping it around. What have I gained from the kitchen to go through a PhD journey?
Yeah.
Is an interesting question, and I've reflected quite a bit on this, um, because I'm part of a group of 55 PhD students who kind of started around the same time in waves. So I
Okay.
also saw the different PhD journeys of people, and I
Uh-huh.
think the one thing where before we recorded, I think we spoke about self-exploitation and
Yeah.
the ability of chefs to self-exploit to an extent. I think, yeah, I've taken that into the PhD, and that meant that I had a very strong work ethic, meaning that I progressed on a timeline which was very challenging at times, no
Mm.
doubt. Um, I think I was also maybe more able than others to hold the different project timelines, like moving forward. It's a bit like if you're working in a fine dining restaurant and you have five
Mm.
different dishes you're cooking, you have five different pots on the hob, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of in your head, you're holding a space where you know, I need to attend to this in a minute, and then I go back and do this other thing, right? And a PhD is very much like that. You will have different parts of your project which are not quite aligned, and you have to always kind of go back to something to eventually then dish out this final dish. Now, it's very abstract how I'm saying that, but that's exactly what happens in the kitchen. In
Yeah.
addition, what you also have to do is, because no research happens independently, there's a whole range of people you're working with. If you want to get research out, you need ethics applications. So the way you're working with people, um, and how you make them part of your team is just the same thing you're doing in a kitchen.
Yeah. No, that
So,
totally makes sense. And I feel like this also this go-getter attitude, or knowing that there can be limitations and you have to still get things done one way or the other. I feel that kitchen teaches you. I don't think everybody highlights it the way you do it, or everybody acknowledges it the way you do it. And I think it's only after you leave kitchens you do things that require that, yeah, suddenly coming up with solutions, or coming up with looking at things that, yes, I do believe, like you, that systems make better chefs and systems are important to better progress things. But I feel because most chefs and most restaurants work without really the common world systems, yes, they have systems to make the restaurant work, but they're not really the obvious ones. So I feel it's this mix of knowing that systems make you better, but then knowing that systems can crash and they're as vulnerable as a piece of the system, and you can still make that work. I feel that's the beauty of having been in both these worlds.
I guess there's another thing which kitchens probably prepared me more for than I'm saying more than other places where I haven't worked in other places or not hugely worked in other places, right? My journey is my journey. Um, but you need to learn to speak up for yourself in kitchens. And you need to learn this very quickly. And you also have to learn how to navigate when tension arises. Now, in a PhD journey, or for most other places where you ever work, you have to be able to stand up for yourself and
Yeah.
articulate when you need help, articulate when you want someone to back off, articulate when you want to offer someone help. So all these things. And because
Mm.
the kitchen can be often quite, well, it will be fast paced, but it can also be quite tense at times. You become, I think, quite good at assertive communication. And this sounds really ridiculous if you
Yeah.
think about all the kind of media representations of chefs where where
Mm-hmm.
chefs are shouting. But I don't think people understand how much emotional intelligence is required when you're leading a team. Yes, we have all the really negative examples in the media, but how many amazing chefs leaders are out there who have the greatest ability to up dial the seriousness of a conversation, and to down dial, and to kind of create opportunities of joy in a day while also working towards a really important goal, right? And making sure that the 10 people who are in the kitchen are all working like clockwork, right? It's 10 different identities, 10 different people with 10 different wants and needs, right? If you are that person at the past, you get them orchestrated all together to work well. I mean, what an outstanding capability, leadership capability that is.
No, definitely, definitely. And I also like, apart from leadership, I feel the first point that you made, that you have to stand up for yourself, or yeah, fight your own battle within these teams to highlight yourself. And I mean, you have not mentioned it, and that speaks more about you, Andrea. But for me, I think I'm in a position where I can speak about this, that in kitchens, in my time in kitchens, I won't say most talented or most skilled, although also, but I feel these talent and skill, these are words which are very, yeah, subjective to which context of a restaurant you're working in. But I think the most hardworking people I've seen in kitchens are women, and it's a pity I don't have even enough women in my podcast. I keep looking for it. I want you and Estefania and people to recommend me which other women can I have on my podcast. But I feel I don't know if you don't want to acknowledge it, or you don't mention it, because I mean it's yeah, it's a sensitive topic. But I feel a lot of women work much harder than their male peers in kitchens, just because there is this, I hope it's dying out, but there is still this need of somehow proving more than is required, because you're sort of outnumbered, unfortunately, in most professional kitchens. And you have to stand up for yourself. You have to, yeah, show you are more than you're not even equal as your male counterparts, but even more than them. And I feel that's something, as a guy working in the kitchen, I have felt it, that the women leading me in the teams are working much harder than the other sous chef who's a guy, just because they feel they have to do it. And I think that also, I believe I mean, it's not mine to speak. I would love to your input on that. But I feel that also gives an edge to women who then step out of kitchens and have been in environments where they are, yeah, outnumbered, unfortunately.
I'm going to zoom out for a second
Yes, please.
and take a more wider societal approach and kind of frame where I'm standing, because it will then explain how I'm explaining my experience as a woman in the kitchen. So I think for societies to function well, we need a balance, a gender balance. We need to stop trying to say that something only arises because of one side of a gender is a kind of contributing to that. Whatever happens in society is co-created. And if we want to speak about male and female, it's co-created through different identities or frames of identity. Now, yes, there is a strong narrative around women not having had the power to gain a certain status within society for many years, and certainly true, evidenced by us not having had elective vote rights in the 1900s. However, it is also the responsibility then to make a stance for that space, right? And to figure out how to do that. So that's why it's collaborative, right? Both
Yeah.
sides have to give and take, and have to engage in that giving and taking, and actively engage in it. So to go back to the kitchen, I've recently contributed to some research on women in the kitchen. A friend of mine, if anyone is listening, is probably still collecting data. Greenwich University, Dr. Julia Thieme,
Okay.
is trying to understand a little bit more deeply why there is still this discrepancy of female chefs, particular senior female chefs. Now, when I had that interview, I said to her, look, I think it's undeniable just by statistics that there aren't that many women in kitchens. But I think there are structural reasons as much as there might be physical reasons why women are not as strong in kitchens, or as many people in the kitchen. So when I started working in the kitchen, we had big stock pots which were 10, 15 kilos heavy. Now, I wouldn't say a man should be lifting these, but even when you're not lifting them, even if you're shoving them around a hob, it requires a certain physical stamina, and there is no two ways about it, right? And I can be a feminist as much as I like. I still have to be capable of actually doing that physicality of the job required, right? So many women will be not unlikely to be put off by that physicality. There will also be a high proportion of men who will be put off by that. But we have physical differences, and it's more likely that men can cope with that physical demand, right?
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
that's one thing. Secondly, when I joined the kitchen, I was 19 years old. Now, that's actually quite old for chef apprentices to go into the kitchen, right? Um, Imagine a 16-year-old young girl going into a kitchen and having period problems. Now, this sounds really random, but
Mm.
as a 16-year-old, I would have not even taken the word period into my mouth on a podcast, right?
Yeah.
And I would have not taken this word into my mouth to speak to an executive chef. So what that meant is, or what that means in reality, if I would be that 16-year-old girl in the kitchen and there is a female colleague, I'm more likely to tell that female colleague, right? Understandably so. Now, for one reason or another, these female colleagues are more likely to have worked in the pastry or in the cold section. Now, it's probably happening that I then spend more time in an environment where I feel like I can be a little bit more myself, right? And the men in the kitchen had nothing to do with that at this point. They've not said they don't want to have this conversation about my
Yeah.
period problems. That's my assumption I'm making, right? So therefore, I'm reinforcing that structure to an extent as well. So I'm by all means not saying there aren't also limitations where there might be a bias towards recruiting a woman into a particular role, right? Yes, for sure, but there are biases to recruiting men into a particular role in the kitchen. We don't see traditionally, when I worked in the kitchen, we didn't see as many male pastry chefs, right? And if there were male pastry chefs, interestingly enough, they were often LGBTQ plus
Mm-hmm.
representatives for one reason or another, right? So I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are social structures which reinforce what we see. And it's not necessarily only badass men saying, women, we don't want you in the kitchen. In fact, I've worked, luckily, with huge amounts of male colleagues who were really empowering, who wanted me to do well, who were mentoring me along the way. So I think not to honor that would not be fair on the work they've been putting in, right?
Definitely, I think it's a two-side job. It's a system job, and I feel there's a lot of ways to go about it. All these things that you've said are do hold truth, and they I have seen in my own environment as well. And then again, there's the whole job of like, I mean, yes, it's not like men have to give permission to for women to enter, and it is more of this tension between within these sides as well, not just between them. And I feel, yeah, it's I would love to, yeah, go through this research whenever this comes out. I think it's gonna, yeah, at least show us some signs of where things are, I wouldn't say going wrong, but how things have played a part, and then gradually why are these things changing, and then you can, using these statistics and research, you can basically foresee a future, what that future looks like. And yeah, moving away from that, Andrea, like talking about sustainability, because I feel a lot of people listening about it by now, as you said, we are in a generation of chefs who have now heard enough about sustainability. I wouldn't say enough, but have it does ring a bell. Mostly the negative things, like the negative side of it rings a bell more than, I mean, negative in the sense of more gimmicky, more just doing things like using food waste to create actual waste, which is the good apple, just using its skin and highlighting that. So going to the other extreme of it. But I know that you have been working on low carbon menus and food waste reduction. If I'm a chef in a restaurant today, because I understand that sustainability sounds important, but I also have service costs, pressure, team issues, the high rotation restaurants face. What do you think are the 2 3 practical things a chef can do tomorrow that actually reduce impact? Because there could be things like, apart from using apple peels, there could be things which do not seem obvious enough, but they do have a massive impact when you measure how sustainable a workplace is.
I mean, one of the things which I think are not so obvious and are part of a place where chefs can engage, and most of my publications go back to the menu, right? And the way I describe the opportunity a chef has to influence the impact of a business is through the menu. And I say the menu becomes an operational principle. And if you think about it a little bit more deeply, the menu defines what that business for a period of time is agreeing to do so, right? The menu says, we're going to make apple pie tomorrow morning, right? Now, if you're intentional about what goes on that menu, you're then agreeing with everyone else in that restaurant that this is what's going to be on that menu, which then means that menu becomes an anchor point for lots and lots of sustainability decisions, right? So Wojciech does it incredibly well, and I don't even need to go there. He will say, cook all the parts and put them all on the plate, right? So I feel that work sits really well with him. I don't really need to do much educating on that. But if you think about other environmental impact, be it water impact, be it carbon impact, be it biodiversity, if you look at the menu you're writing and you ask yourself, what is this particular dish which is on the menu doing, either from a biodiversity point of view, from a water reduction point of view, from a carbon reduction point of view, right? In addition to asking all these other questions, will the guests eat it? Is it profitable, etc., etc.? Then you kind of start shifting how the business is operating. Now, I know, again, there's people who have written lots about menu engineering, and it's a whole research subject in its own right. And I'm not feeling actually almost knowledgeable enough to go a deep dive into menu engineering. But the point I'm trying to make is, currently within menu engineering thinking, sustainability is very low priority, right? Now, that's a dissonance between some of the business ambitions. So if the business ambition is, we want to be net zero by 2040, or we want to reduce our carbon impact, or we want to be a restaurant which only serves organic food, right? Ultimately, that menu has to reflect what that business wants, right? So that means we now need to connect this business ambition with what happens in the kitchen. The other thing which I think people who haven't worked in kitchens may not understand about this ask, oh, you just need to change the menu, right? Is what changing a menu actually means from a chef's perspective. So I had conversations with a wonderful, wonderful chef from the restaurant I worked with, who probably triggered this thinking. He said, well, when I'm thinking about the menu, I'm thinking about, well, who's going to make this particular dish? What space in the kitchen that dish is going to be produced? Which part, which equipment am I using, right? So it's not only what is kind of the ingredient which matters, but what are the logistics of delivering this menu? How long will it take to cook that particular dish? We had a chat in our WhatsApp group yesterday about kotpilpil, right? And the different ways you can actually prepare the dish to streamline the production when you're in service.
Andrea, everything you're saying connects a lot with conversations we've been having recently, like the one you mentioned yesterday on the WhatsApp group that we have in the community. Because many chefs feel something is off, but they don't really know what direction to explore. And that's exactly why I started Fugitive Chefs Circle. It's a small community for those who do not know and are listening. It's where chefs are having these conversations, sharing opportunity, resources, figuring this out together, because most of these pivots outside restaurants are very lonely. And what you need in that pivot is somebody else who's going through the same transformation, somebody who can help you with resources, somebody who can tell you what solutions have worked for them. So if you're listening to this and it resonates with you, you can check it out on fugitivechefs.com. I'll put a link in the description. Please join the community, join our WhatsApp group. I would love to have you on.
Now, that's the sort of thing which will then influence whether a dish is actually capable of being delivered by the kitchen team. So me asking, can you make a low carbon dish, or me asking, can you put more vegetarian dishes, has real life consequences in the way the kitchen logistics operate. And if traditionally, and this goes back really long time, we would have a meat section, a fish section, a sauce section, right? And I'm pretty well aware that this isn't really that common anymore. You suddenly disrupted that structure, and the people who are working in the sauce section, they take great pride in working in the sauce section, right?
Yeah.
The people who are, and this goes back to this men and women. Traditionally, a lot of men would actually do the meat section and the fish section, and women tended to be more at the garde manger or working with the vegetables.
Yeah.
And that would then disrupt this whole structure and the social structure of that kitchen, right? So no one thinks of this when they're talking about menu engineering, but that happens in reality. And whoever is writing that menu has to be capable to navigate whatever social structures are being disrupted if you're making a drastic change to this particular menu.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it, and I feel, as you said, a lot of it is just that you don't even think about it, because I mean, I think you've got much more fires to like extinguish before you come to managing, and unfortunately, it's the core of, as you said, it has to align with the business values, it has to align with the kind of talent you're going to recruit, it has to align with the kind of neighborhood you're going to open in. But unfortunately, people don't look at the menu itself, but look at everything else, and then enforce the menu to somehow fit everything that you've already set in stone, and then you also want to you want to serve something that you like to eat, rather than understanding what scenario you're playing in. And that brings me to my next question about the education gap, Andrea, because you're in a very interesting position now, because you first of all come from academia. I think also Germany's system, I think, is super interesting with the Ausbildung, how it works with education and working at the same time. And then you came into the UK on how things are being done there. And now in today's position, you are working with apprentices, education systems, working with coaching, as you said. But where do you think that what is missing, you would say, that chefs are trained today? Because you're in touch with people who are in different times of I mean, different ages, they're entering the kitchen. What do you think is missing over there? Because clearly sustainability and systems thinking is not deeply embedded yet, although it should be very obvious. So where is this gap in education?
Couple of things. So, full disclosure, I'm working on an alternative protein project in culinary education at the moment, which is a funded project. And as part of that, we try to understand what the curriculum in the UK currently is doing to deliver towards this alternative food system. People on the other side of my academic end are trying to achieve. And just to bring this to life a little bit, if we are looking at some of the academics around the Eat Lancet guide, they would argue that we actually need to shift in Western societies from a very heavy meat, animal protein-based diet to a much more plant-based diet. Now, I always use this and bring it back to this menu narrative. Currently, most menus I see will have, let's say, 3-3-3 to keep it simple, right? You have
Yeah.
one vegetarian, one fish, one meat, right? Now, if I look at this Eat Lancet projection where diets should be going, we would need to have 2 veg, right? And then
Yeah.
1 animal protein. And probably within that starter, main, dessert, you probably would have 1 fish, 1 meat, rather than repeating the meat twice, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And the proportion of the animal protein on the plate would also be much smaller. So that's one thing. We probably need to start thinking about the volume of training, tactical training we are placing on fish filleting, fish cooking, meat butchering. These are all incredible craft skills, and I don't want to say they are not important. I think they are important. But if we are thinking about what we are trying to achieve with a diet, if we are training young chefs 80% of their time on producing dishes which have a high animal protein content, we're actually not serving them for the future, right? If this is the pathway we are going, it's always kind of, there's a chance that
Yeah.
in a year's time we say, actually, this projection for the future isn't relevant anymore. And I'm very well aware what happens in the US, where that narrative is quite apparent
Yeah.
at the moment. So there is this curriculum which is misaligned currently with these ambitions for a sustainable food system. That's one thing. Now, what is interesting, going back to this alternative protein research, that culturally there are huge opportunities to actually bring different cultural expressions of alternative protein in. So when we did our very early research, we wanted to try to understand what the term alternative protein actually means. We needed to define this. Academics need to define stuff, right? And the three of us were sitting there and we are like, well, it's plant-based, but it's also cellular meat. It could be algae-based, it could be mycoprotein, all these different things, right? They all fall in there. But it's also underutilized meats. It's your game, it's your zebra, your kangaroo. If we would just purely consider that we want a more diversified food system, if we would get culinary colleges with the current curriculum to bring in a more diverse range of animal products, right? And
Yeah.
not only feature beef chin and beef fillet, but say, well, actually, there are all these other animal sources, right? Then we probably would already move forward on this ambition of reducing the impact of our diet. Because in most culinary context, if you look at the menu, and I get bored, maybe you as well, you're a chef, right? I look at the menu and there's the steak and chips again, and there's
Yes.
the Chateaubriand again. Like, we've seen it all. Why is it consistently on there? If we are talking gastronomy and we see it as a science of creativity, there should be something on there which I'm like, I've never heard of this, or I've never tasted this, right? But the truth is, menus all very much look the same, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's ironic. I mean, as you said, I feel that creativity is unfortunately just yeah, somehow becoming repetitive rather than being creative in restaurants today. It's just like, how good can I be? I mean, yes, consistency is important, but again, if you really are creative, you would go beyond just buying things which are expensive, or like create limitations for yourself. Go like these alternative sources of protein, and look also beyond your current dynamics. And that's where also I wanted to ask you the next question, talking about alternative proteins. Everybody says, not just in alternative proteins, but people outside kitchens, within kitchens, in the food system at large, say that chefs have way more influence than they think. But from your work in community projects and food systems and research, what role do you think chefs can realistically play beyond restaurants? Like, where else can they, just for them to hear that, okay, they can have a role in these conversations as well? What is it outside restaurants?
I think a couple of things to say. There is a lot of pressure on chefs already, and whether they want to contribute to these conversations externally should always be their choice, right?
Of course.
So let's start with the fact, kind of a self-assessment. Do I have the capacity to do more than I currently can? Because sometimes doing something for yourself is the biggest gift you can give to the community around you, right? So stopping, taking a breath, and kind of getting back to who you really are is just as important as going out and trying to connect with people. Now, I've been supporting the Chef's Manifesto for quite a while, since pre-COVID. And I think the Chef's Manifesto is this loose connection with different hotspots across the world where chefs, increasingly food systems speakers, are coming together, exchanging ideas about what a future food system should look like. And I do believe, given that a huge amount of food is now being produced in catering settings, chefs have to play a role in that. They have to be articulating their wants and needs in these spaces. I appreciate not everyone feels this is their space, and that's okay. There are other spaces where chefs can advocate for change, dare I say. So traditional places, the Chaîne de Rôtessiers, I think I'm saying
Yep.
this terribly, right? Or craft guilds of chefs in the UK. So I'm a member, and I'm only a member since about 2 years, and I find it fascinating to see how traditional the way this organization is running. Now, I can appreciate that there is a reason to protect some of the values of why chefs' profession became as good as they are, right? And part of that holding on to tradition is often to hold on to the good thing, right?
Yeah.
But within that, there are structures which, from my perspective, and I might get backlash on that, feel very archaic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, as I said, pretty new to these kind of networks. So maybe I don't understand all the reasons why they're feeling so archaic. But I do think even within these organizations, if this is your place, you feel at home, calling out what you don't feel is current anymore, doesn't serve the world anymore as the world is today, will make a difference. So I'm an activist. I always think wherever you are, you can influence change. It depends
Definitely.
on your stance. And change can even be just the very people around you. But it all has to start with you understanding what it is, what change it is you want to see in the world, right? And maybe also feeling confident to say why you want to see this change. Because the moment you go into that conversation about this is the change I want to see in this world, you should be fairly confident in at least arguing for that case, right? And I don't mean arguing in the we bounce heads against each other. I mean the academic, the arguing where we are critically examine each other's positions, and we can easily say, oh, I see your point and I see your point, I disagree, and we are happy to disagree, right? That's what I mean by arguing. And that's really just as important. Sometimes you have to have these tension points, because the truth is there isn't anyone in this world who is right and has all the wisdom.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree with you. And I feel it's beautifully how you've put it, rather than suddenly you heard Andrea speak about sustainability or carbon impact and things like that, and you suddenly get into that world as a pivot, but rather question your current surrounding, question what you're doing could be done different within the systems you're in. So it's very interesting you said, and I think it's something that a listener can take away and do something about it immediately, rather than thinking that it's not approachable and very much more intimidating. Before we close this, Andrea, I would like to know from you that today, sitting from where you sit today in this very multidisciplinary environment, coming in contact with chefs, researchers, academics, purveyors, heads of companies who are planning these corporate social responsibility events and things like that, what would you say is something that you would say to your younger self in kitchens? Like, what do you wish you understood very much earlier about this industry? Because maybe that could help the listener to think, yeah, this is the reflection Andrea has. So I think that you're speaking to somebody who's much younger in the industry, I would say, and just starting out. What should they foresee about this industry?
Oh gosh, this is so difficult because I'm someone who believes that every step I've taken
Yeah.
made me who I am today. So it's really hard to say to myself, oh, this is what you should know, because every step I took got me to learn something. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe the one thing I could stretch it to is just enjoy the learning journey, because
Yeah.
it's basically whichever way you turn, you have an opportunity to learn. And um, obviously, being a professional skills coach, right, working in an
Mm-hmm.
education setting, I believe learning is a gift, and we learn every day. We very often don't even stop and think, oh, I've just learned this. And learning isn't easy. Giving ourselves credit for going on this journey, on that zigzag journey of learning, the adversity which comes with it, right? Whether it's in the kitchen, you try a new recipe and it doesn't quite work out, and you're really frustrated because you thought you got this, or you're doing something you've always done and something changes and that recipe suddenly doesn't work anymore. What a gift that failure is for you to
Yeah.
now ask yourself, oh, what did I do that I had this particular outcome? So I think reframing learning as this opportunity is probably what I would tell my younger self.
That's beautiful, Andrea. I feel, yeah. I think it's something very impactful. I think something I would tell myself as would be something very similar to, like, yeah, just recording, documenting whatever's happening, looking at everything, as you said, failures as an opportunity to grow from it, and possibly that's where also pivots come from, right? You see something that has friction, or something that you're somehow more curious about. For you, it was health and nutrition, and then you learn that experience to say, okay, you know what, I could expand into that, and today that has led to you, as you said, in very pragmatic steps, not very obvious pivots you made yourself, but you've made these little choices and they've led to a very interesting position where you're today. So, Andrea, once again, I thank you for being on this podcast, for being in the community, for doing all that you do, for keeping this group of people going. So, I think this conversation for me really expands what being a chef can look like, and that is again the vision of the podcast. I feel you've shared how it's being a chef is not just working in kitchens, but shaping the systems that somehow run them and go much more behind the scenes. So yeah, thank you for sharing journey. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Volkan. Very great pleasure to actually reflect on some of the questions you've posed to me. And in the spirit of learning, I'm sure I learned huge amounts just by reflecting on some of these things.
Thank you, Andrea. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
If this episode made you think differently about your career, the best way to support the show is simple. Follow it, rate it, or share it with someone who might need to hear this. Because a lot of chefs are asking these questions quietly, and sometimes just hearing a different path exists is where some things start to shift. I'll see you in the next episode.